Welcome back to Living Your Human Design podcast with your girl, Brandy. Can you tell I'm literally bursting at the seams? If you are listening to this on the podcast or if you're watching this on YouTube and can literally see my face right now, I am just like overwhelmed with excitement. I know I always say I'm so excited to welcome this guest, but today I really, really, really am. Like, even down to before I pressed the record button, we realized we went about this interview completely different than we normally do. And it's okay. It's okay. I was hoping this interview would have happened like a month ago. Life got in the way, but here we are. And Michelle so beautifully reminded me that everything happens in the right time, the perfect time, and it's all good. But today, literally, I've had so many messages come to me over the past, I would say 6 months about the Akashic Records. And as you know, I have put out a huge call to the universe, like send me people to have interesting conversations with and, guide me on where to invite these people. And so Michelle was one of those individuals who saw my message and felt called to respond. And I am so freaking grateful because from the minute we connected, we just had this crazy spark chemistry. And I have no doubt you're going to be laughing, giggling with us the entire time reading this interview. You're going to learn a bunch of stuff. You're going to have fun. And you're going to see exactly what I saw in Michelle the very first time we met on Zoom. Her energy is so powerful. And just to give you an example, like literally, this is her for like your business card, purpose activator, empowerment guide, and marketing alchemist. Like, I want to be all those things. Can I just, like, when I grow up, can I be like you? I was going to say, when I grow up, can I be like you? Appreciation is too tall. I love to switch bodies. It's all good. So, honestly, without further ado, I just want to get into this and start the conversation. We have no idea where it's going to go. Well, that's not true. We have some ideas, but we're just going to free flow and just let our personalities take over and have fun. So, Michelle, thank you so much for your time, your energy, your everything that you're bringing today. I can already feel it through this little camera that's in front of me. Yeah, well, I'm so excited to have you here. Just briefly, because I honestly don't know your full bio. I know that you are a Akashic Record expert or reader. I'm not sure what the proper terminology is. You also are a human design, a marketing expert. There's so many things that we have in common that overlap, and so many, I want to say, bits of magic that you also bring. And I'm really excited to learn more about you and what those magic bits are. So please introduce yourself to the community. Welcome with open arms.
Thank you. Yes. I love it. I love your energy. I love your passion. And so that really helps me feel into things. So thanks for asking that question. It's been, to be really honest, when I started, I feel like, and I think this applies to everybody. There are different aspects of myself that they're kind of like, there are many different, like, I am this and I am this and I am this. And when I first started, it really didn't, I would say, didn't really blend in together because I was told by a lot of people that I should keep them separate. And I was like, yes. And so I have coaches would tell me that, no, you need to focus on one thing. But then I realized and I tried to follow them and obviously didn't turn out very well. Ended up not really liking what I was doing, ended up feeling, again, that people are trying to put me into boxes. And so it took a lot of years of actually unlearning some of that, where those expectations come from. Why am I fearful? Why am I afraid of not fitting a mold, et cetera, et cetera. And so I love that you asked that question because sometimes it comes up again. I feel like I am many different things, but I love when you talked about magic because I feel like when we bring all aspects of ourselves, when we integrate all of those different facets of ourselves, this is when we can truly be unique. And this is when magic, or I like to say the medicine and the magic really comes through when we embrace all these different parts of ourselves. And so the part
100%.
about, the part about the Akashic Records, that part really the Akashic, and you could call it, some people call it an Akashic healer. I identify more as an Akashic healer or an Akashic practitioner. Some people like to use the word Akashic reader. It really depends. For me, I blend both. Like there's a little bit of reading, but a lot of the focus is really on kind of like inner child work, past life regression, kind of soul, a soul journey type of work. That is more not so much a reading, but an experience. Like I like to use the word journey because it's like an experience. I take you through from the start. We go into your records. We identify, we ask for insights and guidance, anything related to your question and your concern. And then we get answers, guidance, insights, and then we heal it because usually there's a part that comes up where we may be holding on to fear, where they may be bad memories, trauma, energetic attachment, etc. And then we heal it. So I like to talk about it in terms of a journey and an experience. So that part is very much, it appeals to me because like I always believe that a lot of times, we have the strategy in our business. We have, so we may know the strategy in our business, but what's holding us back could be other things, like maybe mindset, maybe fears, maybe blocks that we're not even aware of until we go into Akash and then we realize, oh, that actually is a childhood wound that I didn't even know or remember. And a lot of these things surface in the Akash. And so that was what drew me, was really that part, that healing, because I personally went through something that where energy work really helped me move through in ways that other kinds of techniques or practices wouldn't. So that's the Akashic part. And the human design part, so I know like I'm almost going like,
Yes.
but so it all going to make sense. Because I like to consider myself as kind of like this balance or the bridge between different worlds. And so the bridge between like masculine energy, feminine energy. And so like human design really drew me to, I was really drawn to human design because to me at the real core of human design is really coming home to yourself and loving yourself and embracing yourself. And human design changed my life. And so I'm drawn to modalities because I've gone through them. I benefited from them. And therefore, I'm like, I would love to then put something together to benefit and serve and help other people. So for human design, for me, I feel like growing up in a culture where I was expected to be certain things, do certain things. There's a lot of expectation, a lot of labels. And I spent my 20s really struggling to find myself and really try to unlearn all these conditioning that's been placed on me to then ask myself, what do I really want? Like, who am I really? Not my parents, not society, not anyone else, but
the conditioning. Right.
Exactly. The conditioning. Right. And then after I knew that, I needed the extra help, which is where the Akasha came in, because I was like, how do I move from here to my core self? Because I had a lot of fears. A lot of fears started coming up. A lot of like, am I worthy enough? And all these questions, am I good enough? Can I do this? Am I really, And so a lot of these questions came up that even though I knew, I was like, okay, this is not who I am, but who do I want to become? And can I get there? Am I worthy enough to get there? Am I smart enough? Good enough?
Yeah.
And so that's how I blend both human design and the Akash, because I find that human design gives structure. A lot of times it opened the doors for deeper conversation about fears and mindset. And that once that gets reviewed, how do we move through that in a way that feels aligned? How do we move through those feelings? in a way that isn't traumatic to us, that doesn't strain our nervous system, right? And so then I feel like that's the Akash comes in a very loving way. And that's how I blend the two together. And so I'm always looking for different modalities that will help me kind of like play either in the masculine or in the feminine or just somewhere in the middle. So I can go kind of be somewhere in the middle. And then the very last part about the marketing alchemist was because of my experience in marketing. I've had almost a decade of experience, professional marketing, and was really felt called to empower other healers, other people who do kind of human, spiritual work. And a lot of times, I feel like they're great. They are really like a lot of the healers out there, a lot of people who do spiritual work are very, very good at what they're doing. And they don't necessarily have the time to learn how to do some of the marketing. And so for me, in fact, I actually started in the marketing space first because I thought that was where I should be, even though even though I felt the spiritual side calling me more. But I was like, well, it's a natural progression. I've had 10 years of experience doing digital marketing. I should do this, should. And so I did. Yes, I should. And I was like, this seems like a natural thing, right? And so I did. And then realized, well, I don't actually like it. And I realized more and more people were coming to me, not for marketing help, but actually it was more the Akashic. And then when they were coming to me, a lot of them had, I would say, it's not really strategy related as much as like, they're like, well, I don't know if I should raise my prices. I don't know if I can. I don't know. There were all these other things that was more, I would say, fear-based or belief-based, limiting beliefs that came up, which was why I decided to, bring all different elements. So introduce, bringing in human design as well as the Akashic into the mix.
I love that. Oh my God. Okay, so just to be clear, you are applying Akashic Records and human design to business only. Is that your focus, or is that just what you typically deal in? But people can come to you if they also want to do personal work, personal development.
Yeah. Okay. I am super flexible because I'm kind of like open, People come to me in different ways. A lot of times I would say they will come to me for an Akashic or human design. So a lot of people who come to me they already have their own business or they're pivoting. And, a lot of the women that I work with, have kind of like, maybe they have a business that's been working really well for them, but now they want to pivot to more spiritual work. And then they need somebody to kind of like have been there to kind of hold space for them, to help them feel like it's okay, because there's a lot of fear around pivoting. And I've worked with a lot of them who are just like, I don't know, I've spent so many years growing this community. I'm afraid to tell them that actually I'm now into more woo-woo things.
Yes. Oh my God.
And a lot that's huge. And a lot of the women too, in the conversation, they've always been into woo-woo things. They've always been very intuitive, but they felt like that I had to, be more masculine, or I have to really go deep into the more business, non-woo-woo to be seen as credible. And then I feel like there's almost a shift right now where there are a lot more women, I would say this shift happened maybe about end of last year, where I felt like collectively, at least in my Facebook, in my groups and all the, Instagram and the things that I've been seeing, the women are saying like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. This doesn't align with who I am. I want to embrace that spiritual side or the woo-woo side that I've always been called to do. And so I've held spaces for women like that. There are other women who are more spiritual and they need the more masculine structure. And so I work with a lot of healers too, who are very much like the shamans. They are very into energy work. They're very intuitive. And they're very about flow, right? And they're just like, I know structure. Yes. They're like, I don't know what to do with my business here. And then I was like, okay, let's talk. And so like, I feel like I'm constantly doing the switch between. And sometimes
really are the bridge.
Yes, I was going to say.
Really are. Yeah.
It took me a while to kind of embrace that because I've always felt if you're doing work where you're kind of like in between worlds, then it sometimes feels like you don't belong in either. And that kind of not belonging has been something that it's my whole life. Like that's my narrative, my theme, my struggle, and my entire life. Feeling that I never truly belong in any space. And human design was a way when I learned human design was when I realized, oh my goodness, like it allowed me to like embrace that part of myself to know that yes, it's duality, that I exist in this duality was something I meant to do. And so I was like, well, then I am that's the bridge, I suppose. And so when
Oh my God.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what is your human design? Because we didn't even talk about that in the beginning like I normally do.
All right, sorry. I am a 1-3 sacral
Okay.
generator.
Generator, I knew for sure. I totally felt that. And is your G open?
No, it is not. My G spoke.
Really? Interesting. Okay, so that could explain the conditioning in that
Yes.
area. And then
Oh
what
my
about your
goodness.
will center, your heart?
My will center is open. My will center is open. That's not good enough. And so it's very interesting. The first time when I was introduced to human design, I rejected it. Because I was like, this is not I was like, this is not me. What are you talking about? And I remember I had a conversation with my coach at that time who was like, well, you are just not, in your empowered self. And I was like, what is that even mean? Remember, I was just like, I'm like, this does not describe me at all. This is wrong. And it was just so funny because, and it took me actually coming back to it multiple times throughout the years as I am ready each time I heal. And it's funny because it's almost like, we attract people who are kind of similar to us, who are either kind of like a couple of steps behind us. And so we are able to help them. And so I will attract people who are like, well, this doesn't sound like me at all. And I'm like, I know what you mean. I was like, I know what you mean. And after healing, I was like, oh yeah, because my throat is defined. But for a long time, I behave as an undefined. And so when I learned about the defined throat, I was like, not me. Even when I learned about the defined G, I was like, not me either. But I had to do a lot of the healing, and then it became clearer and clearer. I was like, oh yes. And I started really aligning more with that defined, my defined G, my defined throat. And and so that was why it like really drew me to human design, was because of that understanding. But it's not just the understanding, but it's also the forgiveness and the acceptance. Because I was like, yeah. And so that's why I'm a huge advocate of human design, because I'm like, even if you're just reading like a free version, right? The free version doesn't give you as much depth, but even the free version, I'm like, oh,
you're going to get so much out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And even if you don't, think about it and reflect it a little bit. Because sometimes, like I didn't initially, because I needed more healing. And I had to go through all the healing. It almost took me like, in and out of it for like 2 years before I fully came back and say, wow, this actually is way more accurate, or way more empowering than I thought it was, because I didn't initially see human design as an empowering tool. I thought it was very limiting. In fact, I was actually very disappointed I was not a manifestor.
Get that so much. Oh my gosh. If people only knew what being a manifestor was like, you would not think that. I was like, I got a manifestor. Oh, or I was like, I got a baby jet. Oh, but it took me. So I had to go through a lot of that, and to kind of like see it as not as, to see human design not as limiting and not to put me in a box, but to actually use it in a very empowering way, which is what I now, when I do human design for others, that's what I always talk about. It's like, if it doesn't resonate with you, be fine. Don't, it's okay, because it's all about using human design and leveraging in a way that is empowering. And I always talk, and I love that it's helped a lot of people discover and accept, they love their strength. Everybody love it, love their superpower. But when it comes to their shadows and their blocks,
It
Yeah.
may be a little harder, but it's for some of my clients, and it's interesting, right? Because the we attract the defined centers attract the undefined centers, right? And so I have a lot of clients with open G's, and it makes sense. I love clients with open G's because then they're like, oh, I just love your energy. And I'm like, I get it. I get it. And I am attracted to people with defined ego/heart centers too. Yeah. So exactly,
It's meant to be.
together we're like superpower, right? Like we just,
Exactly.
and for
Oh my
a lot
God.
of
Oh my
yes,
God. So just on a quick note, I can't believe you just said that because the woman before you that I interviewed, she gave me the perfect name for this series, which is super powered.
oh, so that attraction and that super, and they become like this dynamic duo and this superpower, like super team. Yes, and I totally, it's crazy pants how when people tell me I'm just so attracted to this person, I'm like, let's look at their human design because I can assure you there are parts that complete each other. And I was just like going down this rabbit hole because I'm a one, right? So my one needs to learn all these things, research all these things, and go down rabbit holes. But going back to human design and how it really helped me accept some of the things, kind of like I don't like to use the word weakness, like weaknesses, right? Because I like to see them as, when we understand it, as we move through it, they become like portals or doors of wisdom. Because then we went through it and we can hold space for other people. And so I even reframing that thought and just like changing the words. Some of my clients were like, oh my God, I never thought of it that way. And I was like, this is actually perfect because you are so good at holding space for other people in ways that I cannot, because you've experienced what it feels like to be an open G. And then just reframing that for them, allow them to see that as not something where they hate, not something they, or like to say like envy or chart envy or whatever. But something that they consider as empowerment and special and unique about them.
I love that. I love that. When I'm doing readings, I often refer to people's shadow side as the shadow, and especially their open centers as their area of magic as well. Like that's where your superpower lies, because you get to gain so much wisdom by experiencing life this way, more so than someone who's defined, right? And then with the shadows, it's like you get to experience that side so that the gift shines so much brighter.
Yes.
Like you have to find the beauty, the empowerment in it.
Yes. And that's how exactly. And I love that because it's very similar to how I see it as, like, when we talk about the magic, I talk about it as wisdom, because I keep telling them, I said, you are so good at holding space. I had a reflector client, and it's fascinating to have a reflector client, and a little intimidating as well, because I was like, it's like, wow, it's just like in all this person. And the reflector client was telling me how difficult it is to be a reflector. And I told her, and she's a coach, and I said, this is perfect that you are a coach. I was like, this is perfect profession for you as a reflector. I was like, because you can hold space in the way that no one else can. And and we talked about some of the struggle, because she's like, I don't know why I keep triggering people. And I was like, okay. But just that awareness allows her to be like, okay, it's not me. It's not my fault. It's not, because she was carrying a lot of that as well. And so being like, okay, it's not, I'm triggering, it's just who I am. And I was like, use that as a gift. And if they want to work with you, they can. But lots of people will not. And then that's not yours to carry either. And so that was like that awareness sometimes. So they're like, oh, I didn't know why I'm behaving this way. And because of my childhood, when I was struggling a lot with people trying to mold me in certain ways or fit me into boxes in ways, and I spent so much of my life trying to fit into boxes and being extremely unhappy, that it was then I learned, I was like, oh, I see. I don't know where I was going with that.
We're following. We're good. We're good. You're dropping pearls of wisdom. This is so good.
It was like, just keep through, but I don't know where I was going with it. It
Well,
was sometimes
it's
come
a
back.
good segue though, because I was going to ask you, you said something earlier regarding um, energy work, spiritual work, and just in my experience in the past, I would say 5 years, I I feel like I can attest that when I started my energy work journey, my spiritual work journey, it was exponentially more impactful than the years in therapy, right? And not to knock therapy, like honestly, whatever you have going on, whatever mental illness, do what you have to do, find the support that resonates with you. But for me, I know I felt like I just catapulted so much further and faster when I started working in those areas. And so, yeah, I mean, human design, again, just with where you said, it changed my life. It sent me in a whole different direction that I didn't know was even there, you know?
Yeah.
And this work, it's so potent, it's so powerful. And to be on the other side where you can then give this gift to other people is even more. I mean, like,
Yeah.
every time I sit with someone, I feel like I'm healing pieces of myself too, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we attract each other. And
Yeah.
so there's
I love
something
that.
and that I need, that I also need to
Yeah.
know, to learn.
Yeah.
And that's the power.
I love that. I love that you mentioned that because like that's and now I remember when you talked about that. I was like, why I mentioned that because it's the knowing yourself part that I felt for me because I've been forced into with parents who are extremely controlling, parents who uh and lots of parents do that, right? They couldn't achieve certain things because of limitations that they had, and so they like want you to live a life
Child.
exactly. And without asking your child, do you actually want this? And even if the child says, I don't want to, they say, well, I know best, And
Yes.
so I grew up in the kind of environment with the kind of cultural expectation. And so for me, it was really, until like really when I broke free from like
Yeah.
being far away from my parents, that I was able to like, who am I? And so that journey of like, who am I? What do I want? That's why human design. I was drawn very much to understand myself because I've always wanted to understand myself. And then it makes sense now. Now understanding my defined G, it's because I know who I am. It's just been so clouded. And therefore, like when people try to force me to boxes, I didn't want to be. Because part of me already knew this was not who I am. Yes, but it was just so clouded, which is why I did not resonate with the defined G at first. Because I was like, I don't really know who I am. But I do. That was why I was rejecting everything. And so I felt coming back again into like the spirit, like online space or online business, right? Coaches or people telling me, trying to fit me into boxes. There, and that question comes up a lot. They're like, no, wait, what are you exactly? And I'm just like, I am everything. And it always like blows people mind. They're like, what do you mean? No, 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 no. One word, what exactly? And I was like, well, I do this and do that. And they're like, wow, really? And then they're like, niche. And I was like, no, I have no problems getting clients, knock on wood. And I was like, I don't like, what is this niche thing? I do not, and I refuse to be put into boxes. And so like people consider me uncoachable.
I should be called that too. Yes. And unemployable.
There's because you're like, I like this one and like this one and like this. But I understand that's my design now. So I stopped seeing that as a flaw. That was why it changed my life because of that understanding the 3 line. It blew my mind. So the 3 line is unconscious to me because it's 1-3. And I always identify the first one, my first, the conscious line, and then the third was unconscious. And so I didn't understand that was what all I knew was why. So I've always carried a lot of shame. I would say shame more than guilt of going where my heart wants me to go, feeling that I need to experience things. And also it's a route. instead of going the straight route. It's not efficient. And I compare myself a lot with my peers. And I was like, well, why could I be like that person who right away said, this, I'm going to do this, and this is going to be my niche, and I'm not going to stray from this path. But there's a part of me like, I can't. And so I should understand why I have this impulse. When people tell me, do not touch the flame, it's going to hurt you, I'm like, I am touching that.
Really?
Yes, exactly. And I'm that person. And so I've always been told, like, my peers will be like, why, we told you not to. And I was like, well, I'm not going to listen just because you said so. I got to touch. But I had a lot of shame. And it was until human design, which was a couple of years ago, when I was like, what is this? It really opened my mind, because now I lean into my 3-line. I lean into my 3-line in my posts. That's the marketing part. I talked about my 3, like I use my 3-line as lead in to bring people to me. People resonate. And when I realized that, when I was doing more of that, embracing that 3-line more, losing the shame, releasing the shame, I realized that story becomes powerful, and it brings people to me in a way that when I lean into my 1-line in my marketing, in a way that it didn't really. And so when I talked about marketing, I blend human design in my marketing to using human design as kind of like a foundation or like a launch pad to be like, let's talk about how it helps you in your marketing, only because it helped me. Because the 3-line goes out, tries it out first, and then decides I'm going to use it, which is what has been my experience. But I didn't know. I wasn't conscious of it. I was doing it without being conscious of it. But now that I know, I'm like, ooh, now I can be intentional about it. And it changes kind of the energy. I do want to talk about, when you talked about the spiritual and therapy, because that has been my journey. Again, I'm not a medical professional, and I therapy professional. So I still use professional therapy. I love the idea of complementing things, because again, I am in different worlds a lot. I always see the benefits of different worlds and how they complement each other, like science, spirituality, or like religion, etc. Right. And so I still, there's benefit in talk therapy or professional therapy. But like you, what really accelerated, my healing was this energy work, was the spiritual work, because I feel, and I think, as I reflect on it, the 1-line, if I reflect on it and investigate this a little bit, I discovered it's because the talk therapy is very in your mind. It's still very cognitive. But a lot of the emotions need to be processed. There is no rational, no logical explanation. And I was searching for the why a lot. Why did this happen to me? Open head and close ashna. But I'm always like, why did this happen to me? I kept always asking that question. It was very cognitive, and spiritual work allowed me to move from here to my heart.
Yeah.
And it moved the emotions. And I never, for so long being in a culture, like in my, my upbringing was very much kind of seeing intuition and superstition as just being like, it's, like we don't believe in all these things, is there scientific proof to back this up, right? And so for me, like even talk therapy, years and years, I could never go into and feel those emotions. I would not. I refused. And so it never moved anything. Like we could talk about it cognitively all day, but it never felt like
it stays there. It just stays here. Yeah.
It didn't really help me, and I needed to release. And the spiritual work, because it became not logical, a lot of it's guided meditation, even like in the Akash, everything is like suspend your disbelief. We don't, even if it's like things come up where you're like, doesn't make sense, doesn't matter. We follow the energy, and then you start purging. And so for me, I was like, wow, I did not even know that I carried all this resentment. I carried all this anger, all this pain, all of that. And then it just started coming out. Crying was such a huge release as well, even though I've been told not to cry, which was crazy pants, right? But yeah, so that was why spiritual work helped me a lot, and leaning very much more into my feminine, trusting my intuition, trusting my heart. trusting my gut was one of the things I never did. I used my mind to rationalize everything. When I realized it was not, because a lot of the rationalization was based in fear. That's what I noticed, was like fear of failure. And so I would make decisions because I was afraid of failing, afraid of being not good enough. But when I checked in with my heart was like, no, we don't want to do all of that. We want to do this other thing. And, like, screw that.
Right.
So it becomes a very different kind of process, a decision-making process.
Well, there's more ease in it too, because you're operating from a place where it's more authentic. It's not based on an outside thing.
Yes,
right.
100%.
You're really coming back to what is it you want? What do you feel? What do you need?
Yeah. Right? We already know the answer. A lot of times it's right here.
Exactly. It's so interesting too, because I literally just an hour ago listening to a podcast, and the woman said, if we checked in with ourselves and asked ourselves, what do I need, as often as we checked our Instagram or
right, yes,
or picked up our phone, right? We'd be so much more in tune and trust ourselves and really know and move in that way.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a lot of it is checking with your emotions. And that was what, for me, the spiritual journey helped me so much, was because I was so in my mind a lot. And that's where I've been taught. And that's where society values, and so it was unlearning and seeing that there's nothing wrong with trusting your intuition. That woo-woo part, there's nothing wrong with that. You're not crazy. But so many times I've had women, and I, including myself, will be like, am I crazy to think that? Or this is crazy? And you could, like, they're just, and just like, wait a minute, let's reframe that. Let's rethink about that. Why do you think that's crazy? And when you trust your intuition, for me, once, human designed, when I learned how to follow my gut in my decision making, and then when I cleared and released some of those kind of fear-based of not following my intuition, I realized that was like, that's what you mentioned, authentic, right? It become a very aligned, it became decisions that felt really, really good. And it gave me confidence in knowing, this is the right way to go. Rather than and I look back at all the times that I use my mind to make decisions, and I realized after that, I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. Should have listened to my gut.
Right? Because
Exactly. Yeah. And I wish more people did that, because I wish that more people would see emotions as not a negative thing.
100%. And I do feel like that's where we're heading, with the whole thing, the rave happening in 2027. I feel like that is a direction that we're going, which is great. And there's more of us now popping up to validate that, because people still need validation, right?
Yes.
Until they get to the point where they can truly trust themselves. So I feel like we're the light bearers who are coming out saying, it's okay. You can do this. We believe in it. It's a path, right? And I love as well by you being the one through, because you're right. You're the kind of person that takes those chances and then reports back to us.
Right, exactly. That was like, the 3 has to go out and do it, test it out first in service, in service of like the collective. And I was like, I used to not like the 3, because the 3 is really, I felt 3 is hard. And interestingly, I attract a lot of 3, actually, a lot of people with 3s. And I'm like, 6. And so I'm like, I attract a lot of 6. And then I'm like, I understand. Because the 6 has the 3 with
other.
Yes. And I was like, I get it. And there are times I'm like, I understand the pain. Like, I really understand the pain. Because it's not easy to go through the kind of struggle of going out and testing it. And then especially in a society that's kind of like, well, efficiency is important, perfectionism is important. So they're like, why test when there's a tried and tested way? A lot of times I've been fighting against this all my life, and people are telling me, this is the model of success, follow it.
Right.
Why reinvent the wheel? And I'm like, I actually like to reinvent the wheel. I have to. I want to. And then I'm just like, and I'm just gonna go and do it now. And so like that took a long time to be okay with that.
I can already feel there are people listening to this right now and watching us who are like, thank God, someone else who understands me. I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. I'm not off my rocker. No, you are not. No,
Yes,
or you are exactly how you're supposed to be. Keep doing it because that is what you are designed to do.
exactly. Because like, how do we know if this system works for us until we test it? Until someone is there to test it, report back and say, actually, it doesn't work, or actually, it works really well. Like human design, I had to go out and test everything before I adopted it as my own. And then there's some modalities where I'm like, doesn't really align. I don't anymore. So, and so like I think that kind of like testing, it's not easy, but I always see it as like, well, in service of humanity. I try to see it as a fun thing to do now because like I love to experiment. It feels like exciting to me. It feels new to me. And so I try to lean on that fun and pleasure. Like I always try to go back to like, if we are aligned with our purpose, if we are authentic, speaking from our heart, things become easy, things become pleasurable because that's the other side of it, right? The satisfaction versus frustration. And so for me, I just keep thinking about how can I make this pleasurable? And when it isn't, then I'm like, okay, what am I not, honoring right now? Is there something that's coming up that requires me to shift? Because that frustration is the cycle of frustration that pushes you to kind of expand. And so I've learned that the hard way. And that's the thing about emotions. A lot of times people are like, oh, if you're frustrated, try to find other ways so you're not frustrated. But I'm like, negative
is going to keep coming up.
Exactly. And I'm like, it's trying to tell me something. And that's okay. It's okay if you feel frustrated, angry. Like, you don't have to, I feel like sometimes in the spiritual community, there's like, we have to be really high vibe all the time. I'm like, well, we're humans. So it's okay if you don't feel like super happy all the time. That's okay. That's life. And then, but what is this, and so I allow like frustration to come in and sit with it, not holding grace and like not having any judgment about it or about myself, and just ask like, okay, is there anything that needs to shift? And I feel for me is that understanding that the cycle of frustration is very related to to generators. Understanding that allows me to kind of like accept that as like, okay, it will happen. That means expansion is coming, or that means something is not aligned. And then going into the Akashic to see what needs to be moved through. And so that helps me kind of balance the two.
I love that. One thing that came up for me when you were talking about that, it's like, well, two parts. I find that people who start this work feel like, oh, okay, I get it. Once I get it, I'm done. But that's just the beginning. Like, once you step into this kind of work, it's a lifetime process, right? And when things keep coming back up, that frustration, that anger, that bitterness, whatever it is for you, they are signals for you. And a lot of times I think we beat ourselves up like, oh, I'm here again. What happened? But it's just a way for you to recognize something's slightly off. Let's check something. Let's see where we are. Instead of beating ourselves up. Like, we failed, right? No, it's just a signal. It's information for you that something's on its way, something has to be changed, pivoted, whatever it is.
Right? Growth is coming in.
Exactly. Exactly.
You see each of it as an invitation to grow. We can accept it or we can reject it. It's always up to us. We have free will. And so I see each time, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes the feeling comes up. I don't accept the invitation to explore it further. And sometimes I do, especially when it comes up over and over. I'm like, okay, I know, I get it. But so I think it's important to share it because I think like in the spiritual community, there's almost that. I mean, I hear sometimes people talk about it. They're like, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Quick, try to do something to like move
bypass it.
Yes, bypass it. Exactly. I'm like, no. And negative emotions is good, actually. Like that's a healthy, that's being human, and that's okay. And and so sometimes like I would tell people, I don't always accept the invitation because sometimes I'm stubborn. And I say this just because to let other people, like, I feel when I'm able to share it and be transparent, I perhaps give invitation or permission for others to be that way, to say that that's okay and we don't have to beat ourselves over it. You don't have to always, like, every time, oh, for example, I have to do something. Yes. I'm like, sometimes I just want to sit, watch TV with a tub of ice cream and just cry into my ice cream as I'm eating it. That's okay too. Like, I work on it tomorrow.
No, but
I was like,
that to me is the goal right there, because, and that is truly being authentic in your marketing, in your business, in your forward facing life, right? Which I'm so over the highlight reel, right? I want to know, what are people really feeling and doing on a day-to-day basis, because we are human. And I can't expect myself to be on 100% and bubbly and high vibe 24/7. I can't expect you to.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be right.
Yeah. And like, if you are that way, then how do you know when you need to expand? Because then you'll be constantly this way, right? And it's almost like, then it's like, sometimes there are certain things that frustrates you, throw you off a little bit, where you're like, wait a minute. And then that starts the growth or the expansion, the pivot.
Yeah.
But if you're here all the time, I'm like,
where do you go?
Exactly. Then you're like, yeah, like, where do you go? And maybe that's a goal. I don't know. I don't know. But I'm just like, that's just not me right now. And I am open to share that with people because I'm like, yeah, giving them permission. And I love that the more we are open and honest and share our vulnerabilities, insecurities, whatever, right? I think that gives permission for everyone to be like, oh, not to beat themselves up.
To feel heard.
Yes. To know that they're not alone in this, because like, there's been, a time where everyone's like, you talked about the highlight reels, right?
Yeah.
Or look at me in this awesome, perfect light. And then I'm just like, well, it feels like it's the culture almost shifts now, where people are like, I want more authenticity. I want more, vulnerability. I want you to be yourself and to be honest, because I feel like we compare ourselves all the time. And what you see on Instagram, on Facebook, you don't know what their life is behind, and so that creates a kind of culture where you're always constantly comparing yourself to something that isn't really real, and then feeling bad about yourself. Because I have a lot of like, people will come to me and they're like, oh, so and so is doing this, I feel like I'm not. And I'm just like, well, do you know them? Do you see what's going on behind it? But then they're coming with all these extra expectation and all these, which trigger all sorts of fear, and I was like, let's work on those fears. And so it's just, I feel like, as people with platforms like you, like me, when we're on social media, we have a certain responsibility in a way to not perpetuate. We have certain responsibility, certain power, if we choose to accept them, not perpetuating certain kind of stereotypes.
Amen. 100%. Okay. But I really want to talk more about the Akashic Records too, because I love where this is going. And I feel like there's a lot of tie-in too, because it was earlier in the conversation, but you mentioned, the journey that you go on with people when you open the records, and childhood traumas. You also mentioned past lives. So I'm curious, is that a big part of the records too, where you can actually go in and see identify what trauma may come from a past life, an incident in the past life, maybe a death, something along those lines? Does it go that deep?
Yeah, so the Akash really is a collection of all your soul memory, like everything you have done. It's a soul memory. And so the part of believing in the Akash is also believing that this lifetime that we're living in is one of many, and that there are many different dimensions and there are many different timelines, and this is just one of many. And so we carry So the Akash records all your deeds, your fears, your desires, everything, the soul, like since the inception of your soul, right? And so when we go into Akash, it's not just this lifetime. And when I talk about past life, sometimes people are like, "Oh, past life is a different lifetime," and like past. So anything that happens a second ago is considered the past. So that's considered past life. So that's how we see it. And so people often think, oh, in past life, different lifetimes. Yes, sometimes it comes up. And so the interesting thing about the past life is, and this is my interpretation of it, coming from somebody who's a one, so fairly analytical, I just understand things. But a lot of times when we go into so Akashic Records, I approach it from a soul. The soul leads. So when I take you on a journey, I bring you through the Akash. We open your Akashic Records, and then your soul reveals what wants to be known. And so it could be a concern. So maybe you have a fear around certain things, like maybe you have a fear of dogs and you have no idea why, or you have a fear of this and you don't understand why. Then you're like, is this of this lifetime? Or is this a past life? And that's, sometimes it could be multiple layers. So really a deep fear. So for instance, like me, a fear of like, I have issues. One of my core issues is related to scarcity and money wounds. It's been for me, and it's a generational one, which I discover in the Akash is an ancestral generational kind of pattern. And so it's many layers deep, not just in this lifetime. And so for me, it's working through different layers, the mother wound, the father wound, my ancestral wound, lineage, and all the different past life may come up. But what I think is really cool about the Akash, is again, the one line, right, is what the questions that we want or the answers that we're seeking to know that relates to our issue right now. Even if it's a past life, there's always, it's like, I look at it as being symbolic. It is sometimes through symbolism and imagery, it reveals something to you that helps answers your concern. And so there are times sometimes where when we go into a past life and it doesn't make sense, or people will go into a different like dimension where they're like, I don't have a body in this lifetime. I asked them, I said, what do you see? What you're sensing? They're like, I don't have a body. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, I'm just energy. And they're like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And I was like, that's okay. Oh my God, that is perfect. That's okay. Let's explore this a little bit more. And then things come up that is actually really related to this life. And there are concerns that's going on. And I always tell them, we don't have to try to rationalize it, because a lot of times people try to rationalize it. I did that too.
Yeah.
I did that right away. I was like, that doesn't make sense because I know my history didn't happen. and of course, then the question is like, how do you really know if that happened or not? Just because it wasn't recorded doesn't mean it didn't happen. So I decided, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to suspend my disbelief. Just because something wasn't recorded doesn't mean it didn't happen, because it's recorded in like the news or history books, right? That's what I mean.
Gotcha.
So that's what I meant. Sorry.
You're fine.
It's recorded in the Akash, but like in the real world, like it's not something we learned, like, So sometimes I'm like, what does it make sense? And then I'm like, you know what? What was revealed? Did it help me? Did it apply to this life? Did it help me move through? The answer is yes. And I was like, so that was enough for me. And so like for me, that was how I reconciled the both. That's the one line talking, but that's how I reconciled, because I kept asking when I first started the Akash. I was like, and then it's like, if we think of the mind as being fast, like powerful, like that is always through, like, for me, it's like symbolism. And so we talk about the Akash sometimes as tapping into the unconscious part of us, or the part of us that's hiding. And the fascinating thing about the Akash is when I lead people into journeys, sometimes things happen that I had like no clue. And so, but they confirmed it later. So this is an interesting story.
Yeah.
An experience with this client that is really fascinating. So took her into a past life because she wanted to know about her relationship with her father. Like, what's going on? Why are they not getting along, etc. Went into a past life. And then so she was a new client. I don't know her. I don't know her father, nothing. Went into the past life and I said, okay, it shows that, I asked her. So there are a series of questions I asked to see, are we in a past life or is this something else? Was this an inner child? Is this something, and confirmed that it was a past life. And so I said, well, it's your father is a baker, is like working in a bakery. And in this past life, you are a son, da 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 da, all of that stuff. And I was like, the father's unhappy that you are not in this particular past life. Father's unhappy you did not take on the family business, and then pass, da 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 da. After the session was over, she said, "My father loves baking, obsessed with bread making." She's like, no idea why, it's not his profession, but he has to eat it and he makes bread. And then she says to me, and I was like, whoa. And then she said, and she's like, I always felt like I am the oldest. And yeah, and she's like, I always felt like my dad wanted a son, even though my dad never articulated that. And then I was like, this was actually really cool when she confirmed that. And so I was like, the parallels. And I was like, I had no way of knowing this. And then she told, so everything that happened in that past life was very, and this happens to all my clients. Things that happen in your past life is really relevant to what they're going through in this particular lifetime.
I believe that.
Yeah.
It has to, because you carry that. And you still carry that residue.
Exactly. And so it's feeling the energy. And so when I first started and I was first testing this Akashic Records too, I was like, there was no way I would know that because I saw it and I was telling her too, like, this is what I saw. And she's like, yeah, she confirmed it. And so like, I don't know these people. How do I know that this happened? And then another interesting story was, an interesting example was, this was a reading. And I said to the person, I was like, yeah, in this past life, not this past life, it happened in the past in this lifetime. But I said, so I was like, I see a photograph and I was like, there are three people. One of them is, I think it was a daughter or something. It's like, it's her sister. And then I was like, da 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 da. And after that, she said, well, this cannot be my past life. I said, why? She said, well, I don't have a sister. And I was like, oh, okay. But you felt like, your mother wanted you to reconcile with your sister who you're having a bad relationship, like you were fighting. She's like, yeah, no. And then the daughter who was on the call with me was like, she's like, you do have a sister, she's your stepsister. And she was like, oh, I don't consider her my sister. Oh my God. I was like, okay. Because I remember I was like, this is weird, but this is what I saw. So I was like, you know what I saw? So I'm just telling you, this is what I saw. And then it's just like, and I'm like, this is crazy pants. And then later she'll say, oh, I guess you're right. Yeah, I just don't never consider her a sister. And I was like, yes.
Oh my God.
In the photograph, there were three of you, the mother and then two sisters. You were fighting. It felt like you were fighting and she wants you to reconcile. In that particular reading, even though I think it was an Akashic reading, the mother came through in the reading. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes ancestors will come in with a reading with a message. So I've had that happen too with another client whose father passed. And then right away.
Channel as well.
Yeah. So like all of the things that happen. Yeah. So it's all the things when I meet them through, I see things. And sometimes they see something different because when I say it's an experience and a journey, because I may be getting information, but they're getting way more information than I am. And so a lot of times I'm holding space to make sure they get all the information they need. And so sometimes it's just more of like, I ask them, you want to share what you get? Sometimes they don't because it's personal. And that's okay. I was like, and then we'll go. But I receive information. And sometimes I'll be like, okay, there is a person here who do you see this person? And if they say no, then I'm like, that's okay. That happened once. When I was like, do you see this person? And she's like, no. And that was okay. So I asked the person that the energy kept coming up. And it was a very traumatic past life that wanted to be cleared. So it kept coming up. And so I asked, what do you want me to do? And they were just like, release me from this space. And I was like, okay. I asked her twice, do you see her? She's like, no, I don't. And I was like, that means it's okay. She doesn't need to know. And so I will clear it. And so a lot of times I'm having a conversation with the guardians of the records. Do you want me to tell them? Sometimes the answer is no, because we just need to clear it. We don't want to plant that memory to have them think about it. It's done now. So then I would tell them, and I tell them, I said, we cleared this past life. I just want you to know this happened. I'm not going to go into details. Sometimes they actually know that past life, because I work with people who are healers a lot. A lot of the people I work with are already Reiki masters or other healers. And so they've done a lot of work. And so sometimes they're like, I know what past life you're talking about. And then I was just like, okay, we'll just clear it. And
Oh
it's
my
and it's
God.
always fascinating, because when we start talking, we're like, yeah, it's exactly what I saw. Or I just give them a little information. They're like, yes, that's exactly what I saw. Or they will be, yeah. So that example was, so that in that Akashic Records, I felt a father, like the energy came through and so I asked, and it was like the father. And so I said, do you feel him? Like, I'm feeling a male presence. And she was like, my father. Right away, she knew. I was like, okay. And then the session became more of the father coming through in that time to help her with a certain issue. The father told me, I was like, yellow flowers. And I was like, so I told her later, it was like, your father said to brighten, yellow flowers. And she knew exactly. She said, that's my favorite color and my favorite flower. And my dad knows that. And then I was
I
like,
know.
that is really cool. And so each time I do that, it helps me comfort, because I still am, the three lines still wants to test this. The three lines still
Yeah.
wants to know, is this all in my head? So it's
Oh my goodness.
see confirmation after confirmation from people who are like, there's no way you and I be seeing the same thing. That is, and so I like working with people who are kind of skeptical, because I am that way too. And then it's always where they're like, oh my God, there's no way you would have known that, because I work with people who, are always like, I think I'm in my head a lot. I don't know if I'm making this up.
Yeah.
And then for them to hear me say things that they already seeing when they are journeying, they're like, I am not
Confirmation.
exactly. And so
Oh
I've
my
just been like, this
goodness.
is really fascinating. But I follow the energy a lot, and that gives me information. And so sometimes information could be through visual, or sometimes it could be like inner knowing. I just know, or sometimes it's
Mhm.
feelings. So there are times in a session where I would even cry myself, because I feel it. And it's funny, because sometimes the clients are not crying, but I can feel the pain that's coming through.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you're just not. And I was like, that's okay. We just want to move through it. We just want to clear it. And then to just like let it go.
So is there a bit of like hypnosis when you're going into a session? Is your client under or like
No, it's guided meditation. They have full
okay.
control. And so it's guided meditation. We go in there is so I lead them to a guided meditation, and we open their records. And so for a lot of my clients who are intuitive, most of them are. There's some who aren't really, but that's okay, because they still get information just in a different way.
Mhm.
Um, I lead them to a space in their heart that feels very different from what they're used to. And I'm like, that's the space. We begin from there. And we go in this space. And that helps me know that I'm connected to them. Like, I can feel it. It feels different when my records are open and when it's closed. Like, it feels different for me. It feels different for everyone in a different way. Does that make sense? So for me,
Yeah.
I feel it in my heart. Other people feel it in their third eye. Other people feel it in their solar plexus. Other people feel it in different ways.
Interesting.
Then we do the journey. So it's a guided journey. Everything is guided. Some people don't see things, but they hear things, they sense things. And that's okay if they don't see it. They're just like, oh, but I can feel something's here. And then because I'm feeling into their energy too, then I will be able to lead them. And sometimes they don't see anything, then I will ask, why are they not seeing? And then offer, I was like, so what do I need to do? Because I'm asking the records keeper, what can I do to help move it? And sometimes they will tell me the resistance.
Oh.
So
Okay.
I have had, like, there have been situations where it's traumatic, and that happened in this lifetime. And there have been situations where I'm like, with the conversation, they're like, you don't, that person doesn't need to go through the trauma again. They know what it is. We just want to bring awareness to that feeling so that we can just clear it. And then we go into the rest. Sometimes it's a contract. Sometimes I see a contract. There was one session I did where a contract came up and we're like, what are the details of this contract? Let's look. I want to know what the contract is.
Like and so contract?
Yeah, like a soul contract, to help somebody. And so, but it doesn't always happen. It's like whatever is soul led. And so sometimes I'm like, I feel there's a contract. And that whole session ended up just being with that person, with the other person, and then there are Akashic Records there with the contract, wanting to understand why do they have this relationship and then how to move this. And so at that time, the contract wasn't fulfilled. And so she knew it too, because we asked. And so I'm just holding space for them and telling them, so sometimes the client doesn't want to see it, or the client's like, I cannot do this. It's too much for me emotionally. It's happened. Yeah. And then I'm like, that's okay, but I know what's going on. We just clear it. And so then I lead the clearing. So a lot of times is that we just need the insight, and so sometimes the clients are, that's all I need to know. What is this relationship? They know what it is. And then we're like, okay, that contract was not done yet. It wasn't fulfilled, but we know why it was there and what needs to be done to fulfill it. So she understood and accepted the responsibility. But for her, it was like, why did this happen? I just want to know. And so when it was revealed why, then she's like, oh, okay. Like for her, it was just really important to know why. And this relationship that was happening with few other people, they were all interconnected. And so to see that, and then to then be like, what do I need to close this contract, was very important for her to close a chapter. So a lot of times it's just the acceptance, the awareness, the acceptance of it, and some just like clearing it, releasing it. There are some contracts that's done, lessons that are learned, or some energetic cords that's still attached. And then we just like cut it. And then with love and light, we send it back and then we move through. And so a lot of times it helps the client feel confident, have clarity. And that's all they really need, is that clarity, the awareness, that confidence that they're moving forward. So I see that in a way that it's like really helpful, because I do that for myself too. I go to other Akashic healers to move.
I was just going to ask, can you read yourself?
Yes. Yeah, I can go. I can read. I would say I can read myself. I have done my own. Like I'll go in. So it's all guided meditation, and I do it on my own. Like once I open the records, I just do like my own journey. I allow myself to be led, and then things are revealed to me. But there are certain things that I don't see the whole picture. And then I ask, who can I go to help me? And sometimes it's just the energy of like someone else's energy or someone else holding your space allows me to be like, oh, and I actually had one that was really hard. I had someone else hold space for me and I was not getting information. And then I was just like, this is really weird. And so I asked her, what are you seeing? So having some I was like, what are you seeing? What's going on? Why am I not getting? I understood much later was because, and this was a past life, for me, that was actually quite painful, and just started sobbing. And I was like, I don't even know why I'm crying, but I'm just going to release it. And it just came up, but I needed, because I couldn't see anything, but I felt the feeling. And it was, it was something related to like a guilt that I was holding on. And those are, I would say, harder if it's guilt or shame. They're like our shadow sides that we don't want to confront. So then I know I can't move through it. They show me snippets of it, so I'm aware that there is something here, but I cannot do it on my own. I had to have someone else hold space for me because I just couldn't do it. It's just too hard for me to do it on my own. So it depends.
So then could that person clear it for you, or is it still something you need to still hold and process until you're fully ready and then it can be cleared?
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so because you couldn't you couldn't see it, right? It was more challenging for you. Does that also mean it wasn't something that could be cleared, or that the person who was opening your records for you, they couldn't clear it for you because it hadn't been completed yet, or you hadn't processed it enough?
Yeah. So in that specific case, um, that person held space for me to kind of like really follow, giving me more like, she's like, okay, I can see it. I can see this happening, which confirmed how I was feeling. It's actually really cool because it was like in the journey, I asked her too, I was like, what are you seeing? And when she said, I was like, it's exactly what I was sensing. It was a weird, because I felt like I needed a lot of confirmation from her to then be like, okay, to do it. And then finally I did, because it needed to come up. And she ended up, yeah, so we go through, she did the healing and helped me in doing the healing. But for me too, I was seeing, so that's the beauty of like, if someone else is holding space, what she's seeing may not be like everything that I'm seeing. I'm getting a lot of more information. But she's helping me kind of like hold space. And in the healing, I just let her. And so sometimes I was seeing more things coming to help me heal as well. Yeah. And so that happens a lot, especially because I work with healers a lot. So a lot of times the healers like already know, like, and so in the space you're like, oh yeah, I'm receiving this, and so
Right.
yeah, it's just interesting, when I talk about, being this purpose activator. The reason why I like, that's part of my contract, at least for now, that contract is not yet fulfilled, but that's part of my contract, like really helping healers, rebel, mystics, witches, whatever, spiritual people kind of stepping into their power and doing this either as a business. So a lot of them do end up doing it as a business. So they are healers themselves, which is why I think I attract a lot of healers. And it's cool because I have many friends who are Akashic Records practitioner. We all learn from the same person. We all practice together. We trade service to practice. And all of us have a certain kind of like almost I don't want to say niche, but we attract certain group of people. Somebody I know is very good at holding grief. People who have lost loved ones. She's very good at doing that. And she attracts people who are all about that, who need like someone to hold them in grief and loss. And then others are like very good with physical stuff. And so sometimes it's pain that shows up in a person and they don't understand why they have all this pain, and they're very good at holding space for people with physical pain. And so I see that everyone attracts, other people in love, romantic love. They attract people who are all about trying to find their soulmates. I don't attract a lot of them that way. Most of the people who come to me, even those with twin flames, usually have a purpose. Like the twin flame relationship is here so that they can serve other people. And it's cool because after the session, I find that if they're not already a healer, they end up taking healing courses. They're like, after this, it really, And I've had people, yeah, ended up, doing Reiki a lot, doing, like mediumship. But after a session, it's almost like we clear certain things, remove some of the fears, then they sign up and they do spiritual work. And so that's why I consider it like, I say a purpose activator, because it really helps, that's why I attract a lot of healers or people who have doing even like, anything related to spiritual work.
I love that. So I'm curious, what do you do after a session to clear yourself of the energy that you have now given and probably had put on you while you're holding space for someone else? What is your routine or self-care after a session?
That's a very good question. It's very like super important. I always create protection before I start. I don't use my energy. I open. So I kind of like, so you mentioned channel. Like, yes, I guess it's a form of channeling. So I create space, sacred space, and we do that like, calling in sacred space and then placing them in a container. I call it like a sacred container. So we're protected. And then, so in the session itself, do things on the back end that creates a kind of boundary. So I can open their records, but in a very like safe space that once the session is over, I like to visualize like cutting the cord, me attached, and then sending it back to them and not taking back others. So, but because I always place people in a container, with both like it prevents other things from coming up. Sometimes things do come in, not intentionally. Most of the time it's not intentional, obviously, but sometimes fear can happen. It's like fear can come in that manifests itself in different ways because of fear. Then cut cording, like cord cutting is really important. I call upon my guides to create sacred space. And so I do that. I use crystals a lot. I use a lot of crystalline kind of energy, I work with different ascended masters. And so what I do after a session, especially if it's heavy, heavy session is really like drinking lots of water, imagining the water, like trickling down your body. And so I will call protection to ground myself, create space for myself, burn the cords. I work with, I know this may sound crazy, but I work with dragons a lot. And so I love dragon energy or dragon medicine because it's the flame is very it depends. It depends. Like sometimes the flame is very soothing. Sometimes the flame is like fierce. But they're very good at transmuting lower energy. So when it comes to cutting cords, if there's anything, then they come in and set the protection. And I do that. And then I close the record and I then, my own consider myself, so like I open a channel. So like, if we think of ourselves as a channel, I open myself up and then I close it down. Does that make sense?
And then total sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's funny because people sometimes will be like, oh, can't you read me? I'm like, no, I don't want to. Or nor do I. Like I am not tapped into a person's energy to read them unless there's something kind of about that. Like I'm like, I don't like this. Then I'm like, yeah. But most of the time, like I can't read someone's energy unless like I don't. It's an interesting question because sometimes people will ask, they're like, oh, I'm sure you can read me. I'm like, no, I don't.
It's the show. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And I was like, you shouldn't because it should be permission. Everything is permission based. You can't just like read somebody. I'm like, I didn't give you permission. Right. And I was like, I don't want to go into whatever. Like, that's not, like.
That's not safe for you either.
Yeah. And so everything is permission based. And so when I opened the records, I asked them too. It's like, you need to give me permission. We don't just open the records willy-nilly. And I know people have always been, yeah, give you permission. Open my records. Like, can you read this? I'm like, no.
That's not how it works.
Exactly. Because I was like, protection, everything. Like, that's not how it works. But it's interesting. But I'm glad you asked that question because I think when you do any type of energy work, it's very important. And especially because if I'm not, like the energy that I'm drawing from is not from myself. It's more from like, I'm being led to pull energy from different sources. Usually it's from, set the intention. It's from like creator energy or source energy. Like it's not my energy. So I don't always feel drained. The only times I feel drained is like that I'm like, okay, what was up? Like why? And then this is not okay because I've been giving my energy away and need to call it back. So that's when I know like we need to call it back.
Right. Oh yeah. My God.
Yeah. Yeah. But it happened more when I was still new. Yeah. And so now it doesn't really happen anymore because I'm always like, yeah. And because the protection is so important. Yeah. Yeah.
This is so freaking cool. Like I've learned so much more about the Akashic Records, and I even realized it was out there. I had no idea the degree of like what a session would actually be like, and just how deep you can go with it. Thank you for sharing that.
You can go multiple layers deep, and it really depends on how much a person is ready to do.
Yeah.
Because it's always, I always set the intention that it's like what you're ready. This is led by your soul. So what you are ready to receive at this time. There are times when I know when I ask in the records that they're like, well, the client is not yet ready, and that's okay. So I bring it up, and then I'm like, I'm just letting it sit there, but you're not yet ready, and that's okay. And sometimes the client knows they're like, I'm not ready to go there. And I was like, that's okay. We do the first layer, and then they come back again and say, I'm ready now. And so I repeat clients who are like, do the first layer, and then they go do their thing. Like either they go learn Reiki or learn something else related to energy work. And then they come back later and they're like, I'm ready now to let's go deeper into this layer. And that's okay because like it took me many years. Like a lot of people, it's what you mentioned, they think if they come to you for human design reading, they're
done.
Like, yeah, they're done. Like, yeah, I'm like, oh, I know myself. I'm perfect now, 100%. That's not true, right? Because you're like, well, human design, that's the first layer, this embodiment practice. You need to know all these different practices. Like, this is just the first step of saying, I accept this. But there's like, it's almost like, it's what you mentioned, the whole journey. Once you open the door, you don't close it. I mean, you could, but like, it's just like the whole journey of like things coming up. And so for me, I know it was getting deeper and deeper and deeper because I know like first it was like inner child. Then it became like father wound, then it became mother wound, then it became ancestral wound. And so it became deeper and deeper. And I know that, oh, I'm getting at the core of the issue. Like, and sometimes you're like, the answer is you're not ready to see the core yet because there's more things, but you clear deeper and deeper. And so that's why I like I see it as different layers or different angles to the same issue.
Is Akashic Records more on the feminine side? I know you mentioned earlier with like masculine, feminine. So, and human design is more on the masculine side.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes. I'm glad.
Perfect blend.
Yes. I'm glad you agree with me because I always felt compared to the Akash, human design felt more structure and more masculine compared
for sure.
That's for me. And so which is very interesting because like I would get people who are attracted to human design and they'd be like, what is this Akashic? And then they become Akashic friends, or in the other way around too. And people who are very more feminine attracted to human design and later are like, what is human design? And then they go in human design, they oh, I really like the structure. And like, yes. It helps. Yeah, it helps both. But yes, the Akash is very freeform. I don't always like people always like, do you know where we're going? I'm like, I'm just one step ahead of you, man. Sometimes I don't even know where we're going. Like I'll be like, so what are you sensing? Can you tell me more? And then they'll be like, oh, I'm sensing this. And then I'll be like, tune in. I'm like, oh, okay, I know where we're going. And sometimes, like it's a very like open book. Like not open book. How do I explain it? It's just like anything can happen. Like free
it's open.
Yes. And it could go like different. I had one person was like, oh, it doesn't make sense. I'm like, why? She's like, I just keep seeing different shoes, different feet. What is going on? I was like, that's weird. And then right away, they're like the same problem or the same issue multiple lifetimes. And then I was like, oh, and so I explained. I was like, okay, this is what it is. Because so a lot of the reason why I think holding space is really important too, because so there are some past lives that can be hard, especially when we're working with healers who have like, the witch wound or healers where people actually do see the past life and then how they passed on. I've seen, and it's been traumatic, right? And so having someone hold a space can immediately, you start feeling it. So I have some clients who feel it in their body. They're just like, that's just where they get information. And they're like, they freaked out because they feel it. They're like, I am literally burning right now, my whole body. And I was like, pause. And so if they were doing it on their own, then, so because I was holding space, I could be like, let's put a pause, let's stop right away. And so it's usually like these things come up, then I get extra information. They're like, this is what's going to happen. We're going to like resolve this so as to bring them down to a state where they're like, this is a past life. It cannot hurt me anymore. And then we can be able to walk through it. And so that has been really helpful for me. I know for my own, a particular past life to do with my throat kept coming up a lot, related to the witch one, like the persecution, right? Persecuted for doing things that like more spiritual stuff, right? And so that for me, I had to go in multiple times to clear that throat, and so I've clients with that happens a lot as well, related to their throat or related to your solar plexus or their heart. And so for a lot, like that's usually one of the first things that want to come up is sharing your gifts, speaking your truth, being open. So a lot of my clients, when they're pivoting or they're saying, I want to start a spiritual business, but I'm afraid, da 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 da. There's usually something like that will come up, and then that's how we clear it. And I always tell them, I said, because one of the things I love doing is empowerment, right? So after a session, I'm always asking, like, how else can you do this in your own practice so that you can continuously work on things? And so I ask that in the records too. What will be a good practice for that person? So sometimes I'll get things like, I'll be like, oh, singing. And they're like, oh, and the funny thing about singing is like, then I have people like, oh, I've actually stopped singing. Like, but I used to love singing. And I was like, perfect. They want you to sing more, use your voice. And so sometimes there's certain, like, for everyone is a little different. For some people, it's like affirmations, but they have to speak it out loud and they hear it, have to voice it. And then I was like, repeat this. This is what they tell you to do. And you have to like voice it out to use your voice. And that has been, like important. And it just is, like everyone's a little different, but it's always interesting that how it's always very much related to like things that they're already interested in or doing it in their own practice. It's crazy deep. Like it is crazy. Like it is like that's why I like to call it like an experience.
No,
and lots of people ask me, they're like, what is this thing? Because like I call it a soul illumination journey because it's like really it's about like illumination. What are the things, the insights that wants to come up? If there are blocks, what is it? And again, because it's very free flow, free form, it really every session is very different. And I do it a little differently for each client as they are ready to receive. Some people I do more channeling. So I tell them because they're not ready or they just cannot do it. And then I do a clearing for them. So they don't do the journey, but they're there to receive the healing, which is visual, like visualization, guided meditation when I do it with them. For other people, they want the full experience. And I have worked with people who are just like, they are very, very like they're shamans. And so they're just gone. I'm like, you have to come back. Where are you now? Because I don't hear from them. They're like, this whole space for me.
Oh my goodness.
I need to know. It's kind of funny. So it's been the whole gambit.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
This is amazing. Okay, so you have to tell the audience how they can find you. How do they book a session if they're ready, they're feeling called? Like, what are the next steps? Because I have to tell you, you're my person. I am having a session with you guys.
Let's do a session. That's always, I love doing sessions. So it's fun. Yeah. So find me. I think so. I'm going to give you my Facebook. So like find me on Facebook or Instagram. I'm not on Instagram a lot, but I'm on Facebook. And then find me on Facebook, and then let's talk. Connect with me if you have any questions. Excuse me. If you have any questions, or just want to know what does it, want to know more, yeah, let's talk. I'm happy to kind of, explain more details to you. And sometimes, like people have questions related like, oh, would this be helpful? Should I do just a healing session or should I do a journey? Because you're a little different. The journey is sort of like we go on a journey as an experience. A healing session, it's more of like, sit there, I do a guided meditation, a visualization, we heal, things come up, I share with you, but you don't do the journey necessarily. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, what's the time difference? How long is healing versus a journey?
The journey is 2 hours. And
Wow.
yeah, and so the healing section is anywhere from 60 minutes to 90 minutes. The reason why I like to I like for sessions to feel complete. So a lot of times with the journey, the going in and helping you feel comfortable can take anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes, setting, the grounding and all of that. And then before I start the session, I like talking, like, what are you interested in? What do you want to know? What are your goals? What is it? And then we go in. And so with the journey, I'm also channeling information. And so when I got you through, we got you through. And sometimes the journey is a little longer because it takes people sometimes a little longer to get in to the Akash.
Okay.
And that's okay, but people kind of meander and wander a little bit. Sometimes multiple lifetimes come up. They do this and there's another thing. Oh, there's another thing. And so we do that. I like to clear all of it. And then we do the healing because that's the most important thing is the healing. Then we come out of it and then I would tell them, I have a debrief session with their records still open. I'm still channeling, still getting information, but if there's anything they saw, they want clarification, all that happens, that can take like 20 to 30 minutes.
Wow.
It ends up being 2 hours, which is why I say it's a whole experience. The healing is, you go in, you have like, tell me what's your concern. We go in, we do the healing. I still open the records, we do the healing, and then I channel a little bit, but then there's no like journeying. You sit there, receive. And sometimes that receiving is really good for people who may not feel called to do a past life or to do something deeper because you have to be ready to see certain things. So like sometimes I know if I'm like, I just need a healing versus if I need to see certain things. Like with the other past life when that was hard because I was carrying a lot of guilt. I needed to go through that because I needed to connect with that. I needed to know what was that, that issue. I needed to connect with it and I needed to kind of like express, like the emotion has to come up before I felt like it was complete. So it really depends on the person. There are times when people will come to me for healing and they cry the whole time. It's happened. They just cried the whole time. And it's like, that's okay. It's okay. We'll go in. And then they say, I just needed to release. I don't even know what, but I feel so much better now. And I was like, that's all it is. Don't rationalize it. That's all you need.
Wow.
So it really depends on the person. And so my cat,
I just saw a tail go by.
Yeah, she's here. She looked coming over.
So, well, is there one over the other for like a brand new beginner, or is it just really up to them on what they feel like they want, they need?
Yeah. So for a brand new like beginner, it really depends on like how brand new they are. Some I was called to do so when I was extremely brand new, didn't even know about Reiki or do Reiki at all. None of that. I was called as in I felt for me because there was a lot of past life that wanted to come up. So I was immediately drawn to the Akash. And so it's what you feel called to. A lot of times people know, but there are if you have resistance around it, and sometimes that resistance come up because you're like, I don't know if I can see, that's okay. And then I'm like, then let's do a healing first. Then when you're like, oh, because in the healing, I like to include a little bit, not a lot of like journey, but sometimes the healing, depending on the person, ends up being a little bit of a journey too. Only depends on the person. But a lot of times, yeah, the healing doesn't end up that way, but it's still like for people where I can feel resistance, I would say the healing first, then you get a sense of, oh, this is what energy work is like. This is, then you feel like, okay, I think I want to do the next step, the journey.
Right. Oh, yeah. I'm so excited. Michelle, you have literally blown my mind today. Like this was so much more than I could ever have imagined. And it was perfect.
Oh,
Amazing.
thank you. That's the one. I felt like the one that's go deep into things.
Seriously, like you answered all my questions. I will probably have more later on, but all the ones I had written down that were
I love
coming
it.
to me, like,
Send me all your questions because that really helps me think through things too, and help me explain too, and because the thing is like I attract a lot of people who are very analytical, which makes sense because I came from a very analytical world. I have to like test
yeah,
everything. So I'm perfectly okay, with people asking me questions. And they're always really apologetic. I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, no, no. That's okay because I want to like put it all out there. And I understand that because I
right.
always ask questions before I do anything.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, I love that. Oh, thank you so much for this. This was awesome. I cannot wait to talk with you again, or I would love to have you back on here. And I would love to have a session with you and then like have you back on here and we can
And then we can
talk
talk about the session. Yeah, that would be fun to do. Yeah, yes.
done. Done. We're doing it.
I'm sorry, my cat. Well, she's not like she really wants to be here now. She wouldn't leave me alone.
Okay, she's during the party. She knows where the
Yeah,
party
she's,
is.
she's like,
Like this little tail coming back and forth.
I know, and she just doesn't want to leave, and she just keeps doing this.
It is all good. I can literally keep you here for like another hour, but then this will be a 3-hour podcast.
I know. You can break it up into like 2 parts, right? You could do like one part on just the Akashic, other part in just human design, because there was like almost like a break in between. You can just like, right, all right.
Gosh, no, I could talk to you forever. You're just so easy to talk to, and I feel like we're connected. And the moment we did that quick intro, and I never do intros. Like normally, I have a guest, and I do not meet them until we're doing the interview. But with you, it was like, oh, everything's so different. I love it.
I love it, but like, what happens if the energy doesn't?
I trust it. I trust it. I really trust it, and it hasn't failed me yet.
Good. Yes.
But with you, I just wanted some more FaceTime.
Yeah, that's yeah. I love that. I love talking to people too, just to see sometimes if it's a match, and yeah. So like having just that energy about like FaceTime is really like, or even just texting, be like, okay, I get it, like
You're right.
this feels like a good match. You never know, right? Because there's some, sometimes it's just like that, and you never know.
That is true. I've heard podcasts like that. It's like that felt like a struggle. It wasn't flowing.
I don't know. Yeah, I know. And my podcasts are always kind of like, I like to approach it where we're like just having fun, where there's laughter, where there's also sort of like, yeah, it's that's my favorite kind, where we can just like have fun, just be authentic, and just like no script. There's no script.
Exactly. Exactly. I love it. Oh, lady, thank you so much. You are such a joy.
Having me, and I would love to connect after this and like talk more and
go from there. We definitely. And you guys, all of Michelle's information, her contact info will be in the show notes below. So make sure after you're done watching and listening, you scroll down and connect with Michelle. If you're feeling called, if you are ready to explore and journey your Akashic Records, even human design, if you're feeling called to explore that more and you want to connect with Michelle, please do it. If you have business questions, marketing questions, and you're looking for the person, the expert, the guru, the alchemist, contact Michelle. Seriously.
Yes, I leverage human design to as kind of like a launch pad to create aligned marketing messages and strategy, because like it's really helped me in my business when I, use my human design. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. We're all things human design here, so that makes total sense. All right, I am going to let you go because seriously, this will be 3 hours. But we will be back together again very soon. So stay tuned, people. I am going to bring you more of this amazing human being right here as soon as possible. Michelle, have an amazing rest of your day. Stay tuned. Thank you again. We'll be in touch soon. Everyone else, I love you, appreciate you, and thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notifications if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're following on your favorite podcast platform, make sure you like and leave a comment, leave a question for myself or Michelle. I'll make sure she gets it. And let's just stay connected. And if you have ideas for the show, people you want to see and hear from, let me know. I have this platform for you. So if there's something that you are really itching to know more about, let me know. I love you. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now.